How's it going? I'm John from the Radivis. Today we're going to be doing a beautiful builds video that's a little different than the ones we've done in the past. So if you've been following the Radivist over the years, you've probably seen a few of my vintage mountain bike restorations. Some of which are complete teardowns, like brand new paint, new old stock components. Other are kind of like light-handed restorations where I mostly just recable the bike, wax the paint, because like a lot of these bikes have really beautiful usage, or busage, as the guys at Rivendell like to say. And today we're starting a video series of me doing a light restoration on this new bike that just showed up. One of my favorite frame builders from the 1980s is a guy named Tom Ritchey. I just really love his bikes. I think he found a good mix between fillet braze construction and utilitarianism. And the bike's geometries just really reflect even modern riding styles. His finishing work is great, the colors are great, the stance of the bikes are great, and they fit me really well, particularly the 24-inch frames, which are kind of hard to find. So we've already looked at my 1980 pre-serial chicken coop bike and my 1983 Everest, which was a complete teardown restoration. And sometimes these bikes aren't packed all that well and they get damaged in the mail, and it's a big bummer, but this looks like it's pretty well packed. And a saddle and seat post, and this is actually a specialized saddle that's kind of a knockoff of the Unicanada, so that's cool. Never actually seen one of those in person. And then we got the bicycle. Hang it up here, put a little bit of foam down to protect the paint. So what we have here is a 1984 Ritchey Annapurna. The serial number is 4A2, which means it's an early Annapurna. It's a size 24, which is my size, which is awesome. It's cantilever front and rear, which is great. I had a 1985 Annapurna, and it had sat new old stock, just sitting in a bike shop on display. It had front and rear racks. The springs on the cantilevers were installed backwards, so the cantilevers weren't even working. And it was too nice. too nice to ride, too nice to lean against a wall and run in and grab a coffee. And this guy had asked me if I would ever want to sell it, so I sold it to him. And about, I don't know, a few weeks later, I was lamenting the sale, I really missed the bike. And then I get this email from the guys up in St. George at the bike co-op that they've got one in my size. So this is basically Tom Ritchey's highest end model in 1984. It's got a bilam head tube, which means there's a half lug that's then fillet brazed into the head tube that wraps itself around the down tube and the top tube. This kind of construction is painstaking, especially to get it to look this nice. And then the seat cluster is also bilam with a lug face on the top tube and the seat tube, and the seat stays are brazed into that. So there's a lot of finishing work, which is why the Annapurna was considered the nicest model in 1984. And also, one of the really cool things about these bikes is some of them came with a fillet brazed bull moose that attaches to a quill insertion. The earlier Ritcheys, from 1980 to about 1983, used what was called a stub, and that was an extension on the steer tube that was silver soldered in, and then the bull moose would clamp to it. But this is basically a double expanding wedge system that holds the bull moose bar in place in the steerer tube of the fork. Problem is, when they're this old, there's a pretty high probability that this thing is going to be seized. So I figured I'd just kind of talk a little bit about why I like doing these projects while I'm setting this thing up to get it on the ground, just so that we can take a look at it. There's just something about the innovation that came out of the 1980s when it comes to bicycle design. And I mean, that's a book in itself, right? But guys like Tom Ritchey, these bikes didn't really exist in this form. Obviously, you had the, Jack Taylor brothers doing 650B flat bar touring bikes in the UK. You had the Woodsy bikes. You had a lot of people that were doing similar things, but in the 1980s in Marin County and in the South Bay, you just had this like completely different approach to bicycle design. And guys like Tom Ritchey really were among the innovators. And I mean, everyone still loves Ritchey. I mean, we just did a little profile look at some of their bikes they have coming out this year. And I was very impressed with the amount of love that everyone gave that post. So if you read that and commented on the website, I appreciate it. And it's got a lot of really cool parts. I mean, it's actually got Magura brake levers, which was really common in the 80s. Actually, that was like the first brake lever that mountain bikers were using because of its long lever control. These guys were still speccing them into the mid 80s just because of the actuation and how good they feel with some French touring canties. So just imagine like bombing down a fire road like on your modern gravel bike. And you know, the feeling, the exhilaration that gives you. And then imagine doing it on a bike like this with cantilevers and motorcycle levers. So it's a completely different kind of like feeling. And it's one I actually really like. Needs a little bit of work. Definitely some fresh cables will help. Maybe a coat of wax to protect the paint. Probably going to pull everything apart and just clean it really well to make sure that like we don't get a seized quill in the bull moose or seat post later down the road. But overall, I'm pretty stoked on how this thing came out. I really want to just thank the guys at Bicycle Collective in St. George, Utah for thinking of me, for hitting me up, for just being solid and giving me a great deal on this bike. You know, I think the cool thing about a lot of these vintage mountain bikes is the original owners, which is what this came from, are just not riding them that much anymore. So they pop up in the strangest places. And sometimes it's a bike co-op in St. George, Utah. Anyway, this is a little different than what we do at the Radavist. I'm not really a video guy, so I appreciate you being along for the learning process. But I just kind of thought that you guys would appreciate the amount of work that goes into, you know, getting a bike like this and then having it get featured in a photo gallery on the Radavist, which I think we have some of the nicest bicycle galleries on the web. Anyway, thanks a lot. Appreciate your time.